was dying in the rain, not from sickness, but from a world that had decided she was worth nothing. 11 nights without a roof, 11 nights of hunger gnawing at her insides like a beast. And then, in the darkest corner of a forgotten forest, she heard them. 2 little girls crying in the mud, dressed in silk torn and filthy, abandoned and terrified. What Anna didn't know was that saving those children would drag her into a castle of secrets, where the ghost of a dead queen still whispered through the corridors, where every smile hid a knife, and where a broken king would kneel before her with an offer that sounded like salvation but tasted like a curse. Because in Valdor, kindness is the most dangerous thing you can offer. And Anna was about to learn that some castles don't need walls to become prisons. They just need the right person to walk through the gates. The court would try to destroy her. The nobles would call her a schemer. Even the king himself would abandon her when she needed him most. But what none of them understood, what none of them could have predicted, was that a woman with nothing left to lose is the most powerful force in any kingdom. And when the portrait of the dead queen crashed to the floor in front of the entire court, splitting down the middle like a wound reopening, everyone knew. This story was far from over. It had only just begun. The rain fell soft and cold over the fields of Valdor, each drop a quiet whisper against the earth. But Anna heard nothing except the hollow growl in her stomach, a sound she had grown too familiar with, a companion more faithful than any friend. Her hands, raw and cracked from years of weaving thread she could no longer afford, clutched a piece of stale bread wrapped in her tattered apron, the last fragment of a life that had crumbled like dry clay. She was 32 years old, though her body felt ancient, and she had not slept under a roof in 11 days. The weight of that reality pressed against her chest like a stone, making each breath a conscious effort, a small rebellion against the urge to simply lie down in the mud and surrender. But something in her refused to break. Not yet. Her feet, blistered and bleeding through worn leather shoes, carried her deeper into the forest where the rain could not reach as easily, where perhaps she might find a hollow tree, a cave, anything to escape the cold that had begun to settle into her bones. The forest smelled of wet bark and rotting leaves, and somewhere in the distance, she heard the call of a crow, a lonely, mournful sound that seemed to echo her own despair. Yet as she pushed through the underbrush, her heart suddenly froze. A sound cut through the rain, a child's cry, weak, frightened, impossible. Anna stopped, her breath catching in her throat. For a moment she thought hunger had finally twisted her mind into madness. But then she heard it again. 2 voices, small and desperate, calling out for help. Her hands trembled as she pushed aside the low-hanging branches, and what she saw made the world tilt beneath her feet. 2 little girls, no older than 6 or 7 years, sat huddled beneath a twisted oak tree, their dresses made of silk, now stained with mud and torn at the hems. Their hair, golden like wheat at harvest, clung to their pale faces in wet strands. They were shivering violently, their small bodies wrapped around each other, and when they saw Anna, their eyes that held both hope and terror, locked onto hers with an intensity that pierced through every wall she had built around her heart. "Please," one of them whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain. "He promised he would come back. Our father promised." Anna's mind raced, fragments of thought colliding without order. Children, alone, in silk. The word father hung in the air like smoke, and then the second girl spoke, her voice cracking with cold and fear. "The king will find us. He said he would never leave us." The king. The breath left Anna's lungs. Her legs weakened, and she had to steady herself against a tree. These were not just children. These were the daughters of King Edmund himself, the ruler of Valdor, a man she had only seen once from a great distance during a royal procession years ago. Royal blood, untouchable, sacred. And here they were, lost and abandoned in the forest, looking at her, a homeless weaver with nothing to her name, as if she were their last hope. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to turn away, to pretend she had seen nothing. Involvement with royalty meant danger, scrutiny, and one wrong move could mean execution. A peasant who touched the king's daughters without permission could hang for it. But as she stood there, frozen between fear and something deeper, One of the girls reached out a trembling hand toward her, and Anna saw something in that gesture that shattered every rational thought. She saw herself. She saw every abandoned child, every person left to die alone, every soul the world had deemed unworthy of love. Her body moved before her mind could stop it. She dropped to her knees in the mud, ignoring the cold water soaking through her already drenched skirt, and pulled off her thin, ragged cloak, the only thing that had kept the worst of the rain from her skin, and wrapped it around the two girls. They collapsed against her chest, their small bodies shaking with violent shivers, and Anna held them tight, feeling their hearts beating like frightened birds. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she blinked them back. There was no time for tears, only survival. "I've got you," she whispered, though she had no idea if that was true. "You're safe now." But even as she spoke those words, she heard something that made her blood turn to ice. The sound of hoofbeats, heavy, fast, coming closer through the trees. Her arms tightened instinctively around the girls and her mind raced. Was this their father? Or someone worse? The forest suddenly felt suffocating, every shadow a threat, and she realized with terrible clarity that she had just placed her life in the hands of fate. Through the curtain of rain, a torch blazed to life, its orange glow cutting through the darkness like a blade. A horse emerged from the mist, massive and black, its breath steaming in the cold air, and atop it sat a man wrapped in a deep crimson cloak trimmed with gold, a cloak that could only belong to one person, the King of Valdor. He dismounted in one swift motion, his boots hitting the mud with a heavy thud, and for a heartbeat, Anna could not move, could not breathe. His face, weathered and lined with exhaustion, was pale, his eyes wild with something between relief and anguish. He looked like a man who had been running from death itself, and when his gaze fell upon his daughters, safe, alive in the arms of a stranger, his entire body seemed to collapse inward, as if the weight of the world had finally crushed him. He stumbled forward, and Anna instinctively pulled the girls closer, unsure if she should bow, speak, or flee. But then the king dropped to his knees before her. Before her, a homeless weaver covered in mud, and his hand reached out, trembling, to touch the heads of his daughters. His eyes, red and wet, lifted to meet hers, and in that moment Anna saw something she never expected to see in a king: desperation. "You saved them," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You saved my daughters." Anna's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to explain, to apologize, but no words came. And then the king did something that would change her life forever. He reached out and grasped her mud-stained hand in his own, his grip firm but not forceful, and he spoke words that seemed impossible, words that hung in the cold air like a spell. "You need a roof, and I need a mother for my daughters. Come with me." The world stopped. The rain fell. The girls clung to her. And Anna, a woman who had lost everything, who had spent 11 nights without shelter, who had believed she was forgotten by God and man alike, found herself staring into the eyes of a king who was offering her something she thought she would never have again: a home. But as she looked into his face, she saw something else lurking beneath the gratitude, something dark and unspoken, a shadow that made her heart tighten with unease. This was not just an offer. This was a beginning. And beginnings, she knew, always came with a price. She nodded, a single slow movement of her head. And in that instant, as the king lifted her to her feet and guided her toward the horse, Anna felt the weight of destiny settle onto her shoulders like chains made of silk. Nothing would ever be the same again. The castle of Valdor rose before Anna like a mountain made of stone and gold, its towers piercing the gray sky with an arrogance that made her stomach twist. She had seen it from a distance before, during her old life when she still had a loom and a cottage, but never like this, never as someone passing through its iron gates, never as someone the guards bowed to with confusion in their eyes. The courtyard smelled of horses and wet cobblestone, and as she dismounted with the king's daughters clinging to her sides, Anna felt the weight of 100 stairs pressing against her skin like needles. Servants whispered behind raised hands. Noble women in velvet gowns froze mid-step, their painted faces twisting with barely concealed shock. A stable boy dropped a bucket, the clang echoing through the yard, and Anna's cheeks burned with shame. She looked down at herself, mud-caked clothes, bare feet cut and bleeding, hair matted like a beggar's, and understood immediately what they saw. Not a savior, not a hero, just filth that had somehow crawled its way into their perfect world. But the princesses, sweet, innocent Alara and Rosalind, seemed oblivious to the tension. They held Anna's hands tightly, their small fingers warm and trusting, and when they smiled up at her, something in Anna's chest cracked open. She had spent so long surviving alone that she had forgotten what it felt like to be needed, to matter to someone. The sensation was both beautiful and terrifying. A tall woman emerged from the castle entrance, her posture rigid as iron, her dress a deep emerald that shimmered in the dim light. Her face was sharp, elegant, and cold, like a blade wrapped in silk. She descended the stone steps with measured precision, her eyes fixed on Anna with an intensity that made Anna's breath catch. This was Lady Mirena, the royal governess, and the look in her eyes was not curiosity. It was contempt. "Your Majesty," Mirena said, her voice smooth but laced with something venomous. "You return with company." The pause before the word company was deliberate, cutting, and Anna felt herself shrink beneath it. The king's jaw tightened. "This woman saved my daughter's lives. She will be staying in the castle. Prepare chambers for her immediately." A ripple of shock moved through the gathered servants like wind through grass. Mirena's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, Anna thought she saw hatred flash across the woman's face, raw and undisguised. But then the mask returned, and Mirena bowed her head with false obedience. "As you wish, Your Majesty." Her eyes flicked to Anna, and the message was clear. "You do not belong here." Anna was led through corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly, each one more magnificent than the last. Tapestries depicting battles and kings lined the walls, their golden threads glittering in the torchlight. The floors were polished marble, so smooth that Anna feared her dirty feet would leave permanent stains. Everywhere she looked, there was beauty. Vases filled with flowers, sculptures of angels, windows framed with stained glass that painted the walls in colors she had no names for. But beneath all that beauty, Anna felt something else, something wrong. The air was too still, too heavy, as if the castle itself were holding its breath. They passed a group of noble ladies gathered near a window, their voices hushed but not quiet enough. "A peasant," one hissed, "in the royal wing. It's obscene." Another laughed softly, cruelly. "She'll be gone by morning. Mark my words." Anna's hands clenched into fists, her nails digging into her palms. But she said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence was the only armor the poor possessed. Finally, they reached a set of wooden doors carved with roses, and a servant pushed them open to reveal a room that stole Anna's breath. A bed, massive, covered in blankets so thick and soft they looked like clouds, sat against the far wall. A fireplace crackled with warmth. A table held a basin of clean water and a mirror framed in silver. It was more than Anna had ever dreamed of owning, and yet, standing there in her rags, she felt like an intruder in a temple. The princesses rushed into the room, giggling, and threw themselves onto the bed. "Stay with us," Alara begged, her eyes bright with joy. "Please, Anna, don't leave." Rosalind nodded eagerly, her small face glowing with hope. And Anna, looking at them, felt her heart twist painfully. How could she say no? How could she abandon them when they looked at her like that? "I'll stay," Anna whispered, and the girls squealed with delight, wrapping their arms around her waist. For a moment, everything else faded. The whispers, the stares, the fear, and Anna allowed herself to simply feel their warmth. But then, the door closed, and the room fell silent. The servants were gone. The princesses had been taken to their own chambers for the night. And Anna stood alone in the center of that beautiful, suffocating room, feeling the weight of isolation press down on her like a stone. She walked to the window and looked out over the castle grounds. Torches flickered in the darkness, and somewhere below she could hear voices, laughter, conversation, the sounds of a world that was not hers. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and closed her eyes, trying to steady her racing heart. What had she done? What had she agreed to? A sound made her freeze. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming from the corridor outside her door. Anna's pulse quickened, and she turned toward the sound, her body tense. The footsteps stopped just outside, and for a long moment, there was only silence. Then a voice, female, barely a whisper, but loud enough to pierce through the wood. The shadow of the queen still lives here. Anna's blood turned to ice. She stared at the door, her breath shallow, waiting for it to open. But it didn't. The footsteps retreated, fading into the distance, and Anna was left alone with the echo of those words ringing in her ears. The shadow of the queen. Anna had heard the stories, of course. Everyone in Valdor knew that King Edmund's wife had died 3 years ago under mysterious circumstances. Some said illness. Others whispered darker things. Betrayal, poison, a broken heart. But no one spoke of it openly. It was a wound the kingdom refused to acknowledge, a ghost that haunted every corner of the castle. And now, standing in this room that felt too large and too empty, Anna realized with chilling clarity that she had not been brought here to fill a role. She had been brought here to replace a ghost. And ghosts, Anna knew, did not rest quietly. She climbed into the bed, still wearing her filthy clothes because she had nothing else, and pulled the blankets around her like armor. But sleep did not come. Every creak of the castle, every distant voice, every flicker of shadow made her heart race. She thought of the king's face when he had found his daughters. The relief, yes, but also something deeper. Guilt, grief, a pain so old and so deep that it had carved lines into his skin. What had happened to the queen? And why did Anna feel, with every fiber of her being, that she was about to step into a story that had already been written, one that did not end well? Outside her window, the wind howled through the towers, and somewhere in the castle, a door slammed shut. Anna closed her eyes and prayed for morning. But even in the darkness, she could feel it. The weight of unseen eyes, the presence of something watching, waiting. And she knew, with terrible certainty, that her arrival had awakened something that should have stayed buried. The third morning came with a cruelty Anna had not anticipated. Sunlight streaming through her window like an accusation, illuminating every stain on her borrowed dress, every inadequacy she carried in her bones. A servant had brought her clothing during the night, plain but clean, and though it fit poorly, hanging loose at the shoulders and tight at the waist, it was more than she had owned in months. Yet as she descended the stone staircase toward the great hall, her legs trembling beneath her, Anna felt more exposed than she had in her rags. At least in filth, she had been invisible. Now, dressed as someone she was not, she was a target. The great hall buzzed with morning activity. Nobles breaking their fast at long tables laden with bread, cheese, fruits Anna had only seen in merchants' stalls. The smell of roasted meat and honey made her stomach clench with hunger, but she could not move, could not breathe, because every eye in that room had turned to watch her enter, and the silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Lady Morena sat at the high table beside the king's empty chair, her posture perfect, her smile sharp as a dagger. She rose slowly, deliberately, and the sound of her skirts rustling seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet. "Ah," she said, her voice carrying across the hall with practiced projection. "Our guest has finally decided to join us." The word guest dripped with mockery, and several nobles snickered behind their hands. Anna's cheeks burned, but she forced herself to walk forward, each step feeling like wading through mud. She had survived hunger, cold, and loss. She could survive this. But then Marina spoke again, and Anna's world tilted. "Tell me, woman, what is your name? Surely someone of your station has a family name we should know?" The question was a trap, and Anna knew it. In Valdor, family names carried weight. They spoke of lineage, land, legitimacy. Anna had none of those things. Her father had been a weaver, her mother a washerwoman, both dead before she turned 20. She had married young to a man who drank himself into an early grave, leaving her with nothing but debts and shame. She had no family name worth speaking. She was nobody. "Anna," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Just Anna." Mirena's smile widened. "Just Anna. How simple." The nobles laughed openly now, and Anna felt herself shrinking, disappearing into the floor. But then a voice cut through the mockery like a blade through silk. "Enough." The king stood in the doorway, his presence filling the room with an authority that silenced every tongue. His eyes, dark and fierce, swept across the hall before landing on Mirena. "Lady Mirena, you forget yourself. This woman saved the lives of my daughters. She is under my protection, and any who disrespect her disrespect me." The hall fell into stunned silence. Mirena's face paled, but she bowed her head with false humility. "My apologies, Your Majesty. I meant no offense." But her eyes, when they flicked to Anna, promised retribution. The king gestured for Anna to sit, and she obeyed, her legs nearly giving out as she lowered herself onto the bench. A servant placed bread and fruit before her, and though her stomach screamed with hunger, Anna could barely swallow. She could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on her from every direction, nobles whispering behind jeweled hands, servants exchanging knowing glances, children staring with open curiosity. She was a spectacle, a scandal, an intruder in a world that would never accept her. But then small hands grabbed hers, and Anna looked down to see Alara and Rosalind at her sides, their faces glowing with joy. "Anna!" Alara squealed, throwing her arms around Anna's neck. "We missed you." Rosalind climbed onto the bench beside her, pressing close, and suddenly Anna was surrounded by their warmth, their innocence, their uncomplicated love. And for a moment, just a moment, the cruelty of the room faded. The king watched from his seat, and something in his expression softened, a crack in the armor he wore so carefully. He saw his daughters laugh for the first time in days, saw them eat their breakfast without tears, saw them look at Anna with the trust they had once given their mother. And Anna saw him see it, and the weight of that realization settled in her chest like a stone. She was not just a guest. She was not just a savior. She was becoming something far more complicated, far more dangerous. The meal ended, and the nobles dispersed, but the tension lingered like smoke. Anna retreated to her chamber, her body exhausted though the day had barely begun, and sat on the edge of her bed with her head in her hands. She wanted to cry, but the tears would not come. She had cried herself empty long ago. That evening, as shadows stretched across her room and the castle settled into uneasy quiet, Anna heard a knock at her door. She opened it to find a young servant girl, no more than 15, holding a tray of food. "Lady Mirena said you missed supper," the girl mumbled, not meeting Anna's eyes. "So I brought this." Anna took the tray with quiet gratitude, but as the girl turned to leave, Anna noticed something, a flicker of pity in her expression, a hesitation that spoke of unspoken words. "Wait," Anna said softly. "What is it?" The girl glanced down the corridor, then leaned in close, her voice barely a whisper. "Be careful, miss. The court. They don't forget easily. And Lady Mirena." She trailed off, fear tightening her features. "Just be careful." Before Anna could respond, the girl hurried away, her footsteps echoing in the empty hall. Anna closed the door and set the tray on the table, her appetite gone. She sat in the growing darkness, listening to the sounds of the castle. Distant laughter, the clang of armor, the howl of wind through stone corridors. And then she saw it, a piece of parchment, folded and sealed with wax, lying on the floor near the door. It had not been there before. Anna's hands trembled as she picked it up, her heart pounding in her chest. The seal was unmarked, no crest, no symbol, and when she broke it open, the message inside made her blood run cold. "Beware what you awaken. Not all memories should be healed." The handwriting was elegant, deliberate, and utterly anonymous. Anna read it 3 times, her mind racing. Who had written this? Mirena, one of the nobles, a servant. And what memories were they referring to? The queen? The king's past? Something darker? She crumpled the note in her fist, her breath coming fast and shallow. This was not just cruelty. This was a warning. Someone in the castle wanted her gone, or worse, wanted her afraid, and they had succeeded. Because as Anna sat alone in that beautiful prison of a room, Surrounded by luxury she did not deserve and enemies she could not see, she realized with sickening clarity that she had traded one kind of danger for another. Outside her window, the moon rose pale and cold over Valdor, casting long shadows across the castle grounds, and somewhere in the darkness, someone watched, waited, and planned. Anna pressed her back against the door, her heart hammering, and wondered if she had made the greatest mistake of her life. But then she thought of Alara and Rosalind, their smiles, their trust, the way they had clung to her as if she were the only safe thing in their world. And Anna knew, despite the fear coiling in her gut, despite the warnings and the hatred and the impossible odds, that she could not leave. Not yet. Not while those children needed her. Even if staying meant walking straight into a trap. The dreams began on the fourth night, slipping into Anna's sleep like poison through water. She saw a woman in a gown of deep sapphire blue, her hair the color of wheat in autumn, walking through the castle corridors with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly. The woman's face was beautiful but hollow, her eyes empty of light, and she moved as if searching for something she had lost, calling out in a voice that echoed through stone but formed no words Anna could understand. And then the woman would turn, her gaze locking onto Anna with an intensity that felt like accusation, like recognition, like a curse. Anna would wake gasping, her nightgown soaked with sweat, the image burned into her mind like a brand. But the dreams were not the worst part. The worst part was what she discovered during the day. Ilara and Rosalind spoke of their mother constantly, casually, as if she were still alive. "Mama liked the roses in the garden," Ilara said one afternoon as they walked the castle grounds. "She used to pick them and put them in our hair." Rosalind nodded eagerly. "And she sang to us every night, the same song, about the birds and the moon." Anna smiled gently, expecting childhood memories, the natural way children clung to the past. But then Ilara said something that made Anna's blood freeze. "Sometimes we still hear her singing. At night, in the corridors." Anna stopped walking, her heart pounding in her chest. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" The girls exchanged a glance, something flickering between them that Anna could not read. "Her voice," Rosalind whispered, as if sharing a secret. "It comes from the walls. She's looking for us, but we can never find her." A chill ran down Anna's spine, sharp and cold as a blade. She wanted to dismiss it as imagination, the way grieving children made sense of loss, but something in their eyes told her they believed it completely. And worse, something in Anna's gut told her they might be right. That evening, after the girls had been put to bed, Anna found herself wandering the castle corridors alone, drawn by a compulsion she did not understand. The torches flickered in their iron sconces, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move with purpose, and the air smelled of old stone and something sweeter, like flowers left too long in water, beginning to rot. She passed closed doors and empty halls, and with each step, the sensation of being watched grew stronger, pressing against her skin like invisible hands. She should have turned back, should have returned to her room and locked the door. But something pulled her forward, deeper into the castle's heart, until she found herself standing before a door she had never seen before. It was smaller than the others, tucked into an alcove, its wood dark with age and carved with symbols that looked almost like roses, but wrong somehow, twisted, thorned in ways that made her stomach turn. Anna's hand moved to the handle before she could stop herself, and the door opened with a groan that sounded too much like a sigh. Inside was a small chamber, untouched by time, thick with dust and the smell of decay. But what caught Anna's attention was the table in the center, and the object resting upon it. A reliquary, silver and tarnished, shaped like a heart, with a glass window revealing a lock of golden hair inside, and beside it, a letter. The parchment yellowed, but the ink still dark, still readable. Anna's hands trembled as she picked it up, her eyes scanning the words written in an elegant slanting hand. "My dearest daughters, if you are reading this, then I have failed you. I have failed everyone. The life I thought I was building was a lie, and the man I loved was a stranger wearing a familiar face. Forgive me for my weakness. Forgive me for leaving you alone with him. Know that my love for you was the only truth I ever possessed, and that truth died with me." The letter was unsigned, but Anna knew with a certainty that made her knees weak, that it had been written by the Queen, by the woman in her dreams, by the ghost that still haunted these halls. But it was the final line that destroyed her, that made her stomach twist with horror and understanding. "He promised me forever, but all he gave me was silence." Anna's hands shook so violently that the letter fell from her grasp, fluttering to the floor like a dying bird. She stared at it, her mind racing, fragments of understanding clicking into place with awful clarity. The Queen had not died of illness. She had died of something far worse: neglect, betrayal, a loneliness so profound it had consumed her from the inside. And the King, with his haunted eyes and his desperate need for Anna to fill the void, was not looking for a mother for his children. He was looking for absolution. Anna backed out of the room, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps, and closed the door behind her. But as she turned to leave, she saw him, the King, standing at the end of the corridor, watching her with an expression she could not read: surprise, fear, resignation, all tangled together in a way that made him look suddenly, devastatingly human. "You found it," he said quietly, and it was not a question. Anna could not speak, could not move. The space between them felt vast and suffocating all at once. Finally, she managed to whisper, "What happened to her?" The King's jaw tightened, and for a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he walked toward her, each step measured, deliberate, until he stood close enough that Anna could see the shadows beneath his eyes, the lines of exhaustion carved into his face. "I failed her," he said, his voice barely audible. "I gave her a crown and a castle, but I never gave her what she needed. I was too consumed with the kingdom, with duty, with everything except the woman who stood beside me. And by the time I realized what I had done, it was too late. She was already gone." Anna's throat tightened, tears burning behind her eyes. "How did she die?" The King closed his eyes, and when he spoke, his voice cracked. Her heart gave out. "The physician said it was sudden, painless. But I know the truth. She died of loneliness. She died because I let her." The silence that followed was suffocating, heavy with grief and guilt and truths too painful to speak. Anna wanted to comfort him, to tell him it was not his fault, but the words stuck in her throat because she knew that it was his fault, at least in part. He had failed his wife, and now he was trying to replace her, trying to fill the void with someone new, someone who would not ask questions, who would simply exist in the space the Queen had left behind. And Anna realized with sickening clarity that she was not here to be loved. She was here to be a bandage over a wound that had never healed. "I should go," she whispered, taking a step back. "Please," the King said, and the desperation in his voice stopped her. "Please don't. My daughters need you. I need—" He stopped, his hands clenching into fists. "I need to believe I can still do something right." Anna looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not a king but a man drowning in regret, reaching for anything that might save him. And despite everything, despite the fear and the warnings and the ghosts that haunted these halls, Anna felt something shift in her chest. Not love, not yet, but something softer, something dangerous. Pity. "I won't leave," she said finally, though every instinct screamed at her to run. "But you need to tell me the truth, all of it. No more secrets." The King nodded, relief flooding his features. "I will, I promise." But as Anna walked back to her chamber, the Queen's letter burned in her mind, and she could not shake the feeling that promises in this castle were written in sand, beautiful for a moment, then washed away by the tide. And somewhere in the darkness, the ghost of the woman in blue watched, waited, and remembered what it felt like to believe in promises that turned to dust. The whispers began like wildfire, spreading through the castle with a viciousness that took Anna's breath away. She heard them in the corridors, in the kitchens, in the gardens where servants pretended not to notice her passing. "The King has taken a fancy to the beggar woman. He looks at her the way he never looked at the Queen. She's bewitched him, mark my words." The words were poison, seeping into every corner of her new life, and Anna felt them like physical blows, each one leaving a bruise she could not show. The noblewomen were the cruelest. They gathered in clusters like vultures, their laughter high and sharp, their eyes following Anna with a mixture of contempt and fascination. Lady Morena led them with the precision of a general commanding troops, her smiles venomous, her comments designed to cut without drawing blood where others could see. "How fortunate for you, Anna," she said one morning as they passed in the great hall, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "to have risen so far, so fast. One wonders what talents you possess that the rest of us lack." The implication hung in the air like smoke, and Anna felt her cheeks burn with shame she did not deserve. But worse than the whispers, worse than the cruelty, was the way the king had begun to look at her. It was not lust. Anna knew that look well enough from her brief, terrible marriage. It was something more complicated, more dangerous. It was need, raw and desperate and utterly consuming. He sought her out during meals, asked her opinion on matters she had no business knowing, lingered in conversations that should have ended minutes earlier. And every time their eyes met, Anna felt the weight of his longing pressing against her like a physical thing, suffocating and inescapable. She tried to maintain distance, to remember her place, but the castle seemed designed to push them together. The princesses insisted she join them for every meal, every walk, every moment of their day. And the king, watching his daughters laugh and play with a woman who was not their mother, seemed to find something in those moments that he had lost long ago. Hope, perhaps, or the ghost of what happiness might feel like. It was during one such evening, as the court gathered for a feast to celebrate some noble's birthday, that everything shattered. The great hall was ablaze with candles, the tables laden with roasted meats and honeyed fruits, wine flowing freely as nobles drank and laughed with the abandon of people who had never known hunger. Anna sat near the lower end of the high table, uncomfortable in a dress that had been provided for her. Simple but well made, a concession to her new status that still felt like a costume she had no right to wear. The king rose to make a toast, his goblet raised, his voice strong and clear as it carried through the hall. "To friendship," he began, "to loyalty, and to those who remind us that nobility is not born, it is earned." His eyes found Anna's across the room, and the hall fell silent, every head turning to follow his gaze. Anna's heart hammered in her chest, her face flushing hot with embarrassment and something else she could not name. Before anyone could respond, before the moment could pass, there was a sound, sharp, final, terrible. The portrait of the queen, hanging in its place of honor above the high table, fell from the wall with a crash that seemed to shake the very foundations of the castle. The heavy frame hit the stone floor with a sound like thunder, and the painted canvas tore, the queen's face splitting down the middle as if cleaved by an invisible blade. The silence that followed was absolute. Not a breath, not a movement, not a sound except for the echo of the impact fading into the rafters. Every eye in the hall stared at the ruined portrait, and then, slowly, inevitably, turned to Anna. She sat frozen, her hands gripping the edge of the table, her mind screaming that this was not her fault, that she had done nothing. But the accusation in their eyes was clear. Lady Morena rose from her seat with the grace of a serpent, her face a mask of horror and righteous fury. "A sign," she breathed, her voice carrying through the hall with theatrical precision. "The queen herself rejects this intrusion." She turned to the king, her hand pressed to her chest as if wounded. "Your Majesty, surely you see this for what it is. This woman brings misfortune to our court. She dishonors the memory of our beloved queen with her very presence." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the nobles, gaining strength like a gathering storm. Anna felt the walls closing in, felt the hatred radiating from every corner of the room, and she wanted to run, to disappear, to wake up from this nightmare and find herself back in the forest where at least the cold was honest. But then the king's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding as a blade. "Enough." He stepped forward, placing himself between Anna and the crowd, his body a shield, his presence a declaration. "You dare speak of honor?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You, who have never known hardship, who have never sacrificed anything of value, who measure worth by the accident of birth rather than the content of character. He turned to face the assembled nobles, his eyes blazing with a fury Anna had never seen. "This woman saved my daughters when the rest of you were safe in your beds. She asked for nothing, expected nothing, and yet she gave everything. And you would condemn her for that?" The hall remained silent, but Anna could see the resentment simmering beneath the surface, could feel the way the court recoiled from the king's words even as they dared not speak against him. Mirena's face had gone pale, her mouth a thin line of barely contained rage. "Nobility is not inherited," the king continued, his voice softer now but no less intense. "It is proven, and this woman has proven hers 1,000 times over. Any who question her place here question me." He turned to Anna, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart stutter. "She stays, and that is final." The feast resumed, but the joy was gone, replaced by a tension so thick it was suffocating. Anna sat in silence, unable to eat, unable to breathe, feeling the weight of every stare, every whispered comment, every judgment. She had become the scandal she had always feared being, and there was no escape. That night, as she lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, Anna heard it. The sound that had haunted the princesses, that had lived in her dreams. A woman's voice, soft and distant, singing a melody that was beautiful and broken all at once. Anna's blood turned to ice, her body rigid with fear, and she understood with terrible clarity that the queen was not gone. Not really. She lived in these walls, in the memories of those who had loved and failed her, in the guilt that ate at the king's soul like a cancer. And Anna, lying in the darkness, realized that she was not filling a void. She was stepping into a trap, because the dead do not rest quietly when they have been wronged. And the queen, Anna knew with bone-deep certainty, had been wronged in ways that could never be forgiven. The singing continued, growing fainter, fading into the stone, and Anna closed her eyes and wondered if she would ever feel safe again. The morning came with a violence Anna had not anticipated, not in swords or blood, but in words that cut deeper than any blade. She woke to the sound of raised voices echoing through the castle corridors, angry and urgent, and her stomach twisted with dread before she even understood why. Something had happened. Something terrible. She could feel it in the air, thick and poisonous, seeping through the stones like rot. When she descended to the great hall, every face turned toward her with an expression that made her want to flee, not curiosity now, but hatred. Pure, undisguised, righteous hatred. Lady Mirena stood at the center of the room, her posture triumphant, holding a piece of parchment in her hand like a weapon. The king stood across from her, his face ashen, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. And between them, the assembled nobles and counselors watched with the hungry eyes of spectators at an execution. "Read it," Mirena commanded, her voice ringing with vindication. "Let them all hear the truth." One of the counselors, an elderly man with a beard like silver wire, took the letter with trembling hands. His voice, when he spoke, was flat and emotionless, but the words themselves were fire. "My dearest daughters, if you are reading this, then I have failed you. The man I loved proved himself a stranger. He gave his heart to another long before I died. A woman he kept hidden, a betrayal he thought I would never discover. I forgive him, for I am too tired to carry hate. But know this, he is not the man you believe him to be, and those who come after me will only ever be echoes of what he truly desired." The hall erupted. Voices overlapped in a cacophony of shock and outrage, nobles rising from their seats, servants gasping from the doorways. Anna stood frozen, her mind struggling to process what she had just heard. The letter, the queen's letter, the one Anna had found, had been taken, twisted, weaponized, and now it was being used to destroy not just the king's reputation, but Anna's very existence in this place. "You see?" Mirena's voice cut through the chaos like a knife. The queen knew. She knew her husband's heart had wandered. And now this woman, she gestured toward Anna with undisguised contempt. This peasant appears from nowhere, and the king welcomes her as if she were royalty itself. How convenient. How perfectly timed. One wonders if she was always part of the plan. The implication crashed over Anna like a wave of ice water. They thought she was the other woman. They thought the queen had died knowing about her, had written those words with Anna in mind. The accusation was so absurd, so utterly divorced from reality, that Anna almost laughed. But the sound died in her throat when she saw the faces around her. They believed it, or wanted to believe it. Either way, the result was the same. "That's not true," Anna whispered, her voice barely audible over the angry murmurs. "I never met the king before the forest. I didn't even know." "Then explain," Marina interrupted, her eyes glittering with malice. "How a common weaver with no ties to the court just happened to be in the exact place where the king's daughters were lost. How you, of all people, were the one to save them. Some might call that providence. I call it planning." Anna's legs weakened, and she had to grip the edge of a table to keep from falling. The room spun around her, faces blurring into a mass of judgment and disgust. She looked to the king, desperate for him to speak, to defend her, to tell them the truth. But he stood silent, his face a mask of torment, his eyes fixed on the floor as if he could not bear to meet her gaze. That silence, that devastating, cowardly silence, broke something inside Anna that she had not known could break. He was letting them destroy her. After everything, after his promises and his declarations and his grand gestures of protection, when it truly mattered, when her very life hung in the balance, he said nothing. "Your Majesty," one of the counselors said, his voice grave, "this matter requires investigation. Until we determine the truth, perhaps it would be wise to remove the source of controversy from the castle." Agreement rippled through the assembly, voices rising in support. Anna felt the walls closing in, felt the trap snapping shut around her, and she understood with sickening clarity that there would be no investigation. There would be no truth. There would only be the narrative that suited them best, that she was a schemer, a manipulator, a woman who had seduced a grieving king for her own gain. The princesses burst into the hall, their faces streaked with tears, and ran to Anna, throwing their arms around her waist. "Don't let them take her," Alara sobbed. "Please, Papa, don't let them take her away." Rosalind clung to Anna's dress, her small body shaking with fear, and Anna's heart shattered into pieces so small she knew they could never be reassembled. But even the tears of his daughters were not enough to break the king's silence. He looked at them with agony in his eyes, but he did not move, did not speak, did not choose. Anna knelt down, her hands trembling as she cupped the girls' faces. "It's all right," she whispered, though it was the greatest lie she had ever told. "It's going to be all right." She kissed their foreheads, tasting salt and despair, and then stood, her decision made. "I'll leave," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos raging inside her. "I'll go tonight. There's no need for investigations or trials. I'll simply disappear, and you can all return to whatever it was you were before I came." The relief in the room was palpable, nobles nodding with satisfaction, Mirena's smile sharp as broken glass. But the king finally looked up, and the expression on his face, raw grief mixed with shame, made Anna want to scream. Too little, too late. She turned and walked from the hall, the princess's cries echoing behind her, and climbed the stairs to her chamber with legs that felt like lead. Her room, the beautiful prison that had never truly been hers, looked different now, smaller somehow, stripped of whatever illusion had made it feel like safety. She had no belongings to pack, nothing to take except the clothes on her back and the scars this place had carved into her soul. As twilight fell, Anna stood at the window one last time, looking out over the castle grounds that had promised so much and delivered only pain. She thought of the king's words that first night, "You need a roof, and I need a mother for my daughters," and realized they had both been lying. She hadn't needed a roof, she had needed dignity, and he hadn't needed a mother for his children. He had needed forgiveness he did not deserve. On the bed, carefully placed where he would find it, Anna left the necklace, the queen's necklace, the one the king had tried to give her days earlier in a moment of misguided affection. She would take nothing from this place, nothing except the lesson it had taught her, that kindness was not currency in a world built on power, that saving someone's children did not make you family, that love, when offered by the guilty, was just another word for absolution. Anna slipped from the castle as darkness claimed the sky, her footsteps silent on the cobblestones, her heart a wasteland. Behind her she heard a sound, a man's broken sob, distant and devastating, and knew without turning that the king had found her gone. Let him weep. Let him drown in the silence he had chosen. She was done being the ghost of someone else's mistakes. The forest welcomed her back like an old friend, cold and indifferent and honest in its cruelty. And Anna, walking into the darkness with nothing but the memory of two little girls who had loved her, felt something unexpected bloom in her chest. Freedom. Bitter and sharp as winter wind, but freedom nonetheless. The castle without Anna was a tomb. The king felt it immediately, the way the air seemed heavier, the way the light through the stained glass windows looked grayer, dimmer, as if the sun itself had withdrawn its blessing. He had stood in her empty chamber for what felt like hours, the queen's necklace cold in his palm, and understood with brutal clarity that he had become exactly what he had always feared, a man who destroyed the things he loved through cowardice disguised as duty. The princesses stopped eating. They wandered the corridors like small ghosts, calling Anna's name in voices that grew softer and more hopeless with each passing day. Ilara refused to sleep in her bed, curling up instead on the floor by the window, as if watching for someone who would never return. Rosalind stopped speaking altogether, her silence more damning than any accusation. The servants whispered that the children were fading, that grief was consuming them the way it had consumed their mother, and the king felt that judgment like knives in his chest. But it was the people of Valdor who delivered the final blow. News of Anna's departure spread through the kingdom like wildfire, and with it came a fury the king had not anticipated. The peasants who had heard the story of the homeless weaver who saved the royal daughters only to be cast out by the court spoke her name with reverence. In taverns and market squares, they told her story, embellished, mythologized, but rooted in a truth that resonated with every soul who had ever felt powerless. The woman from nothing had more honor than the whole castle, they said. She loved those children when their own father wouldn't protect her. Merchants refused to supply the castle with the same eagerness. Farmers brought their goods late, their faces hard with judgment. Even the clergy, normally so careful to avoid political entanglement, spoke in their sermons about how the powerful abandoned the righteous. The kingdom that had once revered their king now looked at him with disappointment, with disgust, with the kind of contempt that could not be commanded away. Lady Morena, sensing the shift in power, grew quieter, her triumphant smile fading as she realized she had not gained influence. She had helped create a martyr. The nobles who had supported Anna's expulsion now avoided eye contact with the king, uncomfortable with the role they had played in a story that was being rewritten by the people. And the king, sitting alone in his throne room as petitions went unanswered and councils grew tense, understood that he had not just lost Anna, he had lost the respect of his kingdom. He began to search for her, not with soldiers or proclamations, but alone, disguised in simple clothes, riding through villages and forests with the desperation of a man trying to outrun his own guilt. He asked innkeepers and farmers, weavers and beggars, if they had seen a woman matching Anna's description. Most turned away without answering. Others spat at his feet, recognizing him despite the disguise. One old woman, her face lined with years of hardship, looked him dead in the eye and said, "You had gold and gave her nothing. She had nothing and gave you everything. Why should we help you now?" The question haunted him. Why should they? Why should anyone? Days turned into weeks, and the king grew gaunt, hollow-eyed, his grief visible in the lines carved deeper into his face. He stopped attending banquets, stopped hearing petitions, stopped pretending that the crown on his head meant anything when measured against the weight of his failures. And then, on a day when rain fell soft and steady over Valdor, the same kind of rain that had been falling the night he first met Anna, he found her. The cottage was barely more than a shack, its roof patched with straw, its walls crooked and weathered. But through the single window, the king could see her, Anna, sitting at a crude loom, her hands moving with practiced grace, weaving thread into fabric with the same quiet dignity she had carried through every cruelty the castle had inflicted upon her. She looked thinner, paler, but there was something in her expression that had not been there before. Peace. Terrible, hard-won peace. The king dismounted, his legs unsteady, and approached the door. He knocked, and the sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet afternoon. The weaving stopped, footsteps, and then the door opened, and Anna stood before him, her eyes widening with shock before settling into something colder. Not hatred, worse, indifference. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice flat, and the formality of it cut him deeper than any blade. "Anna." His voice cracked on her name. "Please, I need to speak with you." She did not move aside, did not invite him in. Just stood in the doorway, arms crossed, a barrier made of flesh and disappointment. "There's nothing to say." "There's everything to say." He took a step closer, rain dripping from his hair, soaking his clothes. "I was wrong. I was a coward. When you needed me to stand with you, I stayed silent, and that silence was the greatest sin I have ever committed." Anna's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. "My daughters are dying," the king continued, his voice breaking. "Not in body, but in spirit. They won't eat. They won't speak. They wander the castle like ghosts, calling your name. And the kingdom," he laughed, a bitter sound, "the kingdom has judged me and found me wanting. They speak your name with love and mine with contempt, and they are right to do so. Then you have what you deserve," Anna said quietly. The words struck him like a physical blow, and he staggered back a step. "I do," he whispered. "I do. But my daughters, they deserve better. They deserve you." He fell to his knees in the mud, no longer a king but simply a man, broken and begging. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you to love me. I'm asking you to save them one more time. Please." Anna looked down at him, and for a long moment she said nothing. The rain fell, the world turned, and the king knelt in the mud, waiting for judgment from the only person whose opinion still mattered. "Why should I?" Anna finally asked, her voice soft but steady. "Why should I return to a place that chewed me up and spit me out? Why should I trust you when you've already proven you'll abandon me the moment it becomes difficult?" The king looked up, rain and tears mingling on his face. "Because despite everything, you are a better person than I could ever hope to be. Because you loved my daughters when you had no reason to. Because," his voice broke completely, "because you deserve to know that your kindness was not wasted, that it changed us." "That it changed me." He reached into his cloak and pulled out something, a small wooden carving, crude but recognizable. A bird. "Ilara made this for you," he said, holding it out with shaking hands. "She said it's so you'll remember them, so you'll know they still love you." Anna's composure cracked. Her hand moved to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks as she stared at the tiny carving. And in that moment, the king saw her armor shatter, saw the woman beneath, not the martyr, not the saint, but someone who had loved and lost and ached with the same desperate loneliness he felt. "You need a roof," the king said, the words familiar but transformed. "And I need a mother for my daughters. Come with me." This time there was no command, no transaction. Just a man, stripped of everything except his humanity, asking for grace he did not deserve. Anna took the carving, holding it against her chest like a treasure. She looked at the king, truly looked at him, and saw not the crown or the castle or the power, but the grief and regret and desperate hope of someone who had finally learned what mattered. "I'll come," she said finally. "But not for you. For them." "I know," the king whispered. "I know." And as they walked back through the rain toward the castle, the kingdom watched and whispered, and something like hope began to bloom in the hearts of people who had forgotten what hope looked like. The castle gates opened, not with fanfare, but with silence. A silence so profound it felt like the entire kingdom was holding its breath. Anna walked beside the king through corridors that had once felt like battlegrounds, but now the nobles who had mocked her stepped back with something new in their eyes. Not fear exactly, but recognition. They had watched their king humble himself, had heard the stories from the villages about the woman who asked for nothing and gave everything, and they understood, perhaps for the first time, that they had been on the wrong side of history. The great hall had been prepared, though Anna had not asked for it. Candles blazed in every sconce, their light warm and golden, reflecting off the polished stone and the faces of the assembled court. At the center of the room stood the princesses, held gently by servants who had been trying desperately to comfort them. But the moment Alara saw Anna, she broke free with a cry that shattered the silence like glass. "Anna!" The child ran, her small feet flying across the marble floor, and Anna dropped to her knees just in time to catch her. Rosalind followed, both girls crashing into Anna's arms with such force that they nearly knocked her over. Anna held them, her face buried in their hair, breathing in the smell of lavender soap and childhood innocence, and felt tears she had thought long dried up streaming down her cheeks. "I'm here," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm here, my darlings, I'm here." The court watched in absolute silence, and more than one hardened noble found themselves wiping away tears they would later deny. Lady Morena stood at the edge of the crowd, her face pale and drawn, all traces of triumph gone. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, as if the weight of her own cruelty had finally bent her spine. The king stepped forward, his hand raised, and the room fell into an expectant hush. He looked different than he had weeks ago. Older, yes, but also somehow lighter, as if confessing his failures had freed him from a burden he had carried too long. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the hall, strong and clear and without the armor of royal pretense. "I stand before you not as your king, but as a man who has failed profoundly and been given a grace he did not earn." He turned to Anna, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "This woman saved my daughter's lives when she had every reason to pass them by. She brought light to a castle that had forgotten what light looked like. And when faced with cruelty and accusation, his voice broke, when I abandoned her in her moment of greatest need, she did not curse us. She simply left, with dignity I could never possess." He reached into his cloak and withdrew the queen's necklace, that symbol of everything complicated and painful between them, and held it up for all to see. The sapphires caught the candlelight, throwing blue shadows across the walls. "This necklace belonged to my late wife, a woman I failed as thoroughly as I failed Anna. It represents everything I did wrong. The silences that should have been words, the distance that should have been presence, the pride that should have been humility." The king walked to Anna, who still knelt with the princesses in her arms, and lowered himself to one knee before her. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. A king kneeling before a commoner, reversing the entire order of the world. "This is not a gift of possession," he said softly, his hands trembling as he held out the necklace. "This is a symbol of truth. You taught my daughters what it means to love without condition. You showed this court what real nobility looks like. And you taught me," his voice cracked, "you taught me that a crown means nothing if the man wearing it has no courage." Anna stared at the necklace, then at the king, then at the faces of the princesses gazing up at her with hope so bright it hurt to witness. Slowly she reached out and took the necklace, not as a claim of status, but as a bridge between the past and whatever future they might build. "I'm not a queen," Anna said, her voice soft but carrying through the hall with unexpected strength. "I never wanted to be. I'm just a woman who believed that kindness matters more than blood, that love is not something you inherit, but something you choose every single day, even when it costs you everything." The king helped her to her feet, and as he fastened the necklace around her neck, the princesses pressed close, completing a circle that felt both fragile and unbreakable. Alara tugged on Anna's dress and whispered loud enough for the front rows to hear, "Does this mean you're our mama now?" Anna looked down at the child, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "If you'll have me," she whispered back, "not to replace the mother you lost, but to love you as my own. Is that enough?" "Yes," both girls said in unison, and then Rosalind added in her small, earnest voice, "We don't need another queen. We just need you." The hall erupted, not with polite applause, but with genuine thunderous approval. Nobles rose from their seats, servants emerged from doorways, and even the guards lining the walls struck their spears against the floor in rhythmic approval. The sound built and built until it felt like the very stones of Valdor were singing. Lady Morena stepped forward then, and the room fell silent, tension crackling like lightning. She approached Anna with slow, measured steps, and for a moment, Anna braced herself for one final cruelty. But when Morena spoke, her voice was quiet, stripped of its usual venom. "I was wrong," she said simply. "I let my grief over the Queen's death poison me into protecting a memory instead of the living. You showed us all what we had forgotten, that nobility is action, not title." She bowed, a genuine bow of respect, and retreated back into the crowd. The feast that followed was unlike any the castle had ever seen, not because of the food or the wine or the entertainment, but because of the laughter, real, unforced, joyful laughter that echoed through halls that had been silent for too long. The princesses refused to leave Anna's side, chattering endlessly about everything she had missed, showing her drawings and dolls and stories they had written. And Anna listened to every word as if it were scripture, treasured and irreplaceable. Late in the evening, as the celebration wound down and the princesses finally fell asleep with their heads in Anna's lap, the king sat beside her on the dais. They did not touch, did not speak for a long moment, just sat in comfortable silence watching the court slowly empty. "Thank you," he finally said. "For what?" Anna asked. "For coming back. For forgiving what should not be forgiven. For showing me what I should have been all along." Anna looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not a king but a father, a widower, a man trying desperately to be better than his worst moments. "I didn't come back for forgiveness," she said softly. "I came back because those two little girls needed someone to show them that love doesn't abandon you, that promises can be kept, that the world, despite all its cruelty, still has room for grace." The king nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Will you stay? Not as an obligation, not as a duty, but because you choose to." Anna looked down at the sleeping princesses, at their peaceful faces, at the trust written in every relaxed muscle. She thought about the cottage, about solitude, about safety. And then she thought about this messy, complicated, beautiful thing called family. "Yes," she whispered, "I'll stay." And in that moment, as the candles burned low and the castle settled into the peaceful silence of a home finally at rest, Anna understood something profound. She had not come to Valdor seeking redemption or status or wealth. She had come seeking nothing at all. But in giving everything, her kindness, her courage, her capacity to love without condition, she had found something she thought she'd lost forever: a place to belong. The narrator's voice, warm and knowing, wrapped around the final image of Anna with the princesses sleeping in her arms, the king watching over them all with something like hope in his eyes. In a land where gold commanded and power dictated, one woman with nothing reminded a king of the value of what cannot be bought, that the truest crown is worn not on the head but in the heart. And as the last candle flickered out, the kingdom of Valdor slept peacefully for the first time in years, knowing that sometimes the greatest stories are not about kingdoms won or battles fought, but about a homeless weaver who taught a castle full of nobles what it truly means to be royal. Sometimes the greatest act of courage is not fighting back. It's choosing to love when the world gives you every reason to hate. Anna had nothing. No home, no family, no reason to care about two lost princesses shivering in the rain. She could have walked away. She could have protected herself. But she didn't. And that single choice, that moment of pure, selfless kindness, changed an entire kingdom. It exposed the cowardice of a king, the cruelty of a court, and the emptiness of power without heart. But here's the question that should haunt us all. Would you have done the same? When survival screams at you to save yourself, when the world punishes you for being good, when even the people you help abandon you in your darkest hour, would you still choose kindness? Would you still choose love? Because that's what this story is really about. It's not about castles or crowns or royal blood. It's about the quiet, invisible heroism of people who give everything and ask for nothing. It's about how the world measures worth by what you own, But true nobility is measured by what you're willing to sacrifice. Anna taught a king how to be human again. She taught his daughters that love doesn't come from titles or bloodlines. It comes from showing up day after day, even when it costs you everything. And she taught all of us that sometimes the greatest throne you can sit on is the one built from the simple, radical act of caring for someone else's pain. So if this story moved you, if it made you feel something real, don't let it end here. Share it with someone who needs to remember that goodness still matters in a world that often feels dark. Leave a like to help others find this message, and follow this channel, because stories like these, stories that remind us what it means to be truly human, are what we need now more than ever. Thank you for listening. And remember, you don't need a crown to change someone's world. You just need the courage to care.